Welcome to the Well-Being Manifesto Podcast, where we translate science and experience into realistic and sustainable ways of living. In each episode, we offer clear and practical strategies to support all aspects of well-being that matter to you, whether in your home, your community, or place of work. The Well-Being Manifesto is hosted by Dr. Moain Dabrh and Dr. David Freeman, who have spent their careers advancing whole person care. Join us as we focus on real lives and real change, with less hype, more truth, better living.
So welcome one and all. Welcome to the Well-Being Manifesto Podcast. I'm Dave Freeman.
And I am Moain Dabrh. Today, our guest is Dr. Christine Porath, a professor, researcher, speaker, and author dedicated to building workplaces where people can thrive and not just survive. Her book, Mastering Civility, and her most recent Mastering Community work, it talks about how everyday behavior, from listening to acknowledging to building belonging, are transforming performance, engagement, and the overall well-being, not just on the professional level, but on the personal level. So in our conversation today, we will cover so many different aspects of Dr. Porath's work. We appreciate her being here. Welcome, Christine, to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. So Christine, would like to start with your journey. You spent your career studying civility and incivility at work. Was there a formative experience that set you on this path?
Yes, there were a couple actually. So it all started with my dad. He had worked for not one, but two really toxic bosses. He hid it very well from us, I think, or was trying to. I'm the oldest of four, and we got a call. It was a summer I was home after junior year, and he was in the hospital. He had been taken by ambulance. And I just remember walking up to the hospital room and seeing him lying there with electrodes strapped to his bare chest. And he looked, really embarrassed. And it was something that I never expected to see. He was an otherwise very healthy, vital, coached us, and didn't recognize exactly what had happened other than it was work related, and knew that he had, a lot of stress around his bosses. Since then, of course, he shared some particulars around this. And I was really shocked because I assumed he was an outlier and this didn't happen to many people. But just a couple years later, I scored what I thought was my dream job. I had played college sports and combined that with working in sports management and marketing. And I'd had a good experience at the headquarters, but the subsidiary was very toxic. And so I went down there and I saw, and it happened to me, although I was often a witness, when I would hear things, like you're an idiot or, things like that. I recognized how people responded, and it was causing a lot of turnover. The best people were leaving, but also it was causing a lot of performance related problems, but also I saw people taking it home with them, and it was affecting their personal relationships as well. And I was very naive, but I just felt like we can and should do better. We pour so much of our time and energy into our work lives, and I just felt like we should be paying attention to how we treat each other, and why aren't leaders kind of tracking the various outcomes around this. So it set me on a path to try to document and show as objectively as possible what are the costs of this. And then slowly but surely, I wanted to get to what are the benefits of civility and building these respectful workplaces where people can really thrive. And I think you touched on the word thrive, and that's kind of been the focus of so much of my research. I always wanted to thrive outside of work, but also inside. And so that's really the general umbrella under which all of this falls.
I appreciate you sharing this personal experience, and I'm sorry that your dad had to go through this, and you all had to bear witness to such experience, which, as you mentioned, became a formative event for you. So you have the personal journey that you've gone through, and then your research and the research that has been done that showing how the impact of work and just treating people can affect our own not only professional, but also personal well-being and physical health. So if you would share with us the early signs that one can look for when it comes to thinking about the culture of work, and how can we identify these helpful or harmful practices?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with how people are showing up at work. Do they want to show up? How are they contributing? Are there maybe a lack of engagement, or are there performance impacts that you're seeing that you can't put your finger on necessarily? I think a lot of it, what we ask people to do is look for patterns of turnover, for example, where there's hotspots or where there may be a leader that's very toxic. But those are some of the things. I mean, really, you're looking for people to plug in and to be engaged and for people to feel a sense of belonging. I know so much of this ties to, do people feel like they have psychological safety or a sense of trust and respect? And so, especially in your world, are people speaking up to you, whether that's nurses or staff or colleagues? Are people literally engaging with you and, seeking information, sharing information, asking for help? All of those things are signals that they feel connected and safe. And that's a big part of this.
This also ties up nicely to what has become now a pandemic. Maybe if we can talk a little bit about burnout.
Yes. Unfortunately, so much of this is tied to burnout. I think what we see is, for example, the number one reason that people are rude or uncivil when we've asked them, and we all are from time to time, we slip up, but the number one reason by far is feeling stressed or overwhelmed. And so I think in any job or industry, or just generally, if society is feeling burnt out from, you mentioned the pandemic, like that, I think a lot of people were feeling that. But I think healthcare is particularly stressful, and there's such a huge issue with burnout that this is something that it becomes all the more challenging in contexts where people are stressed, overwhelmed, burnt out. Like, it's hard, it's hard to treat people well when you're not feeling good.
That's fantastic. And Christine, you talk about the witness effect. Could you explain what that means?
Sure. So we started out studying when people experience incivility, what happens. And in particular, given that we do a lot of workplace research, what's the effect on performance and things like that. And the effects may not be too surprising if if you experience this, right? You may not work as hard. So much of what we are finding is people weren't even aware of that, though. It was unconscious. They literally weren't as attentive or, able to cognitively function as well. But really, I think the more interesting research came out of, if you're just around this, if you witness it, or you hear about it, does it take you off track? And surprisingly, we found in experiments that it affected you virtually the same way. There was, roughly a 33% decrease in cognitive performance. People were 3 times less likely to help anyone that was uncivil, not just, the person that was uncivil to them. And so people became much more self-focused, much less other-focused. It also tended to increase dysfunctional thoughts. And we, have since traced dysfunctional behaviors and things like that. So we see this spread in ways that people aren't even aware of. But unfortunately, it affects witnesses just the same way. Like, we're getting primed with negative or rude information, whether it's social media, whether it's colleagues that we may be around, and that's affecting us in so many important ways, but we're not necessarily aware of that.
That's great. And could you comment or clarify, because we hear things about negative contagions, but there's also some individuals have a positive influence. We certainly hear about the toxic employee, or how that creates a negative contagion, but how would you frame the witness effect in this sort of terminology?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. We talk about incivility or rudeness like a virus, and you can catch it anywhere, whether that's at work, at home, in our communities, online. And what we know from our and others' research is it affects people's emotions, their motivation, their performance, how they treat others. And that's true, again, if we experience it or we just witness it, we're passing that on. So that's such a big part of it, is how this ripples in communities and really affects people quite negatively. And again, it's almost that untraceable. You don't, because people aren't necessarily admitting to this. So then you're trying to figure out like what's prompting all of this. And so you're really trying to control what you can, whether that's being around people that are both respectful, ideally positive. Your question makes me think of our work on energizers and de-energizers. And so de-energizers aren't necessarily rude. They're just people that may suck the life out of you. You don't want to work with them. You find out they're on your team or what have you, and you're thinking, oh, and so what we find is de-energizers have 4 to 7 times the effect as energizers do. So like so much of the psychology research teaches us, bad is stronger than good, but it's really costly.
And de-energizers often, it's not to stigmatize them, but also to say that maybe one of the important things to pay attention to is how can we help them move to the other side?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because when I started this research, I was really focused on like, how do we stop these jerks at work? And, really was thinking this was quite intentional. And what I've learned is that so much of this stems from a lack of self-awareness. Like, most of this is not bad people trying to do bad things, particularly in your profession. People go into it for noble reasons. They're trying to help people. And yet, as my friend Tasha Eurich has found, when she asks people how many are self-aware, 95% believe they are. They have a good sense of strengths and weaknesses. She has found that only 10 to 15% are actually self-aware. So that leaves, 80% of us missing the mark on any given day. And then there's one other bit of research I mentioned when we ask people, why are they uncivil? Only 4% say because it's fun and they can get away with it. So, it's outliers that are intentionally causing these problems. Otherwise, I think we just have blind spots.
I remember we had a conversation with Dr. Amit Sood, and he's talking about assuming positive intent, API. And I said, Amit, I can assume it up to maybe 90%. And then at some point, you just know that some people are just intending to be bad. So I appreciate you bringing it up the 5% that from research, that's what we find, that some people unfortunately choose to be that.
Right. Yeah. But I love the fact that you're trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, because, I struggle with that as well. And I think just reminding myself of the self-awareness research is really quite helpful. And I think it makes, people more open-minded about honing in on what could they do differently. In other words, sometimes when I'm asked to speak at places, people don't, especially, skilled professionals and things, they don't want to take a look at themselves and say, I'm rude, I'm bad to people, I have this terrible effect on people. You can imagine in your healthcare profession, like, again, people want to care for others. They're trying to help, and yet could be having a really negative effect on teams around them. And so getting that information, I think, is such a critical part of, how do we help move our communities in positive ways where people thrive? And we may be contributing for better or worse in ways that we're just not aware of.
So what could managers or people in situations like that, and leaders, can do to identify, catch? What are some of the tools to identify these behaviors before they spiral?
I think the big thing is getting people feedback. And I ideally, you would be encouraging people to seek this feedback on their own, or providing some systems where they're getting it through a coach that can ask about behavior and ways that people will speak up about it. Whenever there's power or status differences, people are going to be reluctant to report behaviors. And so really what you're wanting people to do is to ask for information on this. And just provide some, what am I doing that's helping the team or the organization? What am I doing that may be holding people back, and that's really helpful. Tasha has an example of dinner for truth, or coffee or lunch. And so you literally could ask someone, what is it that most frustrates you, or that I am doing? And you'd be surprised often at the feedback that you get, around those issues. And so that can be really helpful. If you're not comfortable doing that, again, a coach, we talk about 360 feedback, but people really have to feel safe to report things, and also believe that the organization or their leader has intentions to actually make some changes. And unfortunately, what our data reveals is that people often have a sense of fear or hopelessness that the organization will act. And so that's why if you can create a culture where the idea is you have loving critics and you're striving for what Kim Scott calls radical candor or compassionate candor, really what you want to do is encourage people that, we're helping each other, like we're lifting each other's game by providing this feedback, just like a great coach would, and this can be peer to peer, or it can be people from above you or below you. But the idea is to really get it into the culture such that we are comfortable having these conversations,
I wonder if this relates to your own work and how it shifted from just civility and mastering civility into more towards the community. And when you talk about it, can you share a little bit more about that transition?
Sure. So, a couple of things prompted that. To your point, absolutely. Like, I think part of this was seeing the ripple effects and the contagion, and knowing that, wow, like if we started looking at this from the community standpoint or from the culture standpoint, we might actually learn a lot. But to your question earlier about like the personal story is really that my brother Mike created a community around people with disease, disabilities, disorders based on my goddaughter and niece, Annabelle. And what happened was that people were helping solve each other's problems. Halfway around the world, he'd be posting, and literally it just was something where, because she has a rare chromosome disorder and there wasn't a lot of information out there when they got the diagnosis. And so one of the things that was so helpful was finding other parents that were coping with similar situations. And so anyway, the short of it is that sense of community, that it's based on lived experience versus experts necessarily or others, that was really helpful. And one of the things that Mike shared with me was that he thought he was solving for healthcare issues, when a few years later he realized that he was really solving for isolation and loneliness. And that, when you receive a diagnosis or when you're caregiving for someone, that can be so incredibly helpful. And I was seeing some similar things in my own data. I had collected data with Tony Schwartz, who's the CEO of the Energy Project, and we had a rare opportunity. We ended up collecting data from over 20,000 people with Harvard Business Review. And these were people that worked in all different professions, stood at all different levels in the organization. And one of the data points that I was so shocked about was that, and this was well before the pandemic, over 65% of people said they felt no sense of community at work. And knowing the connection between, feeling a sense of community and thriving, and so many of these outcomes, like its effect on health and well-being, engagement, retention, I could point to, wow, if we could move the needle and make people feel a sense of community at work, we would get all of these beneficial outcomes that would be wins, certainly for the individual. With health and and all of that, but also for the organization as well. And so that's really a combination of both on the personal front, seeing how helpful community was and how we needed so much more of this, but also from my own data with colleagues, how it was really lacking in surprising ways to me. Like, I just didn't realize it was that extreme. And then, as you might imagine, through the pandemic, we saw that it dropped an additional 37%. So, it's a global problem that we're grappling with. And Robert Putnam's wonderful research on community and plenty of others. You had the Good Life author on, Dr.
Waldinger. Yes.
Waldinger. Yeah. And his research is so amazing. And so I think that there are so many data points that show how important community is to our thriving, both in the workplace, but outside of the workplace. And just one final data point on that, which is what we find is a positive correlation between thriving at work and thriving outside of work. So one of the solutions to, if you're coping with incivility or you don't feel a sense of community, is find it outside the workplace. You'll bring a stronger, more resilient self. You'll bring a better self to the workplace. And again, we know that that's contagious. And so it can have really positive effects for people.
It's community is belonging, and belonging is community. So I love that you said this is sometimes we can find it in our own place, and that's for many reasons. And you try to bring it, which often people feel a little also maybe deflated that they have to create the solutions for their workplace. And that's understandable. So how can one navigate those steps?
Yeah, I think you just have to decide that it's worth it, that we can only control what we can control. And so you start where you can. And so in the Mastering Community book, I point to a couple women actually that started that, one of whom created her own workout program as a young employee at Dell. She just decided people were really unhealthy in her call center. And this was something that she felt like she could just start doing, didn't require a budget. People started running together, and it was just a way that people began connecting with each other. And so I don't think you need necessarily a lot of resources. This is something that you could start small on, whether it's a team or a couple coworkers, what have you, and choose what works for you and others. That might be a book club. That might be, there's wonderful friends of mine at the Motley Fool, a small financial services company, that they had people, this was during the pandemic, that would speak up about what they wanted to teach others online. And so you had this whole variety of, knitting, butchering, different games. And really what happened is people felt this sense of thriving from sharing this information, because we get such joy out of giving, and then this was something that they've since continued, where also people learn about each other, and it's been a real win for the organization.
Community.
Yeah, community, exactly.
Christine, I think Moain and I have we kind of see well-being sort of in three interlocked circles. One being this inner, second one being this interpersonal, third being this organizational well-being. And one of the acronyms that we came up with for the organizational circle is leadership, which is a list of attributes. And it's like, leaders listen, they engage, they appreciate, define or delegate, so they're effective, they educate, they're responsive, they try to help, synergize, they're innovative, and they value their people. So what I hear you talking about is what interlocks those three circles is, the values the person has, interpersonally they have, but also organization, sort of that value alignment, that purpose. And so my question is, what do you think the effective leaders' attributes, that create trust and psychological safety, that really like supercharge that sense of belonging, community across those areas?
Yeah, such an important question. I think, and I love how you frame this and what you're running with. I think a lot of it boils down to character, and I know that that encompasses a lot of the things that you mentioned. The work that I've done actually with the women's soccer team at UNC and their coach Anson Dorrance. One of the things that we see is the differentiator between, even national championships and not, is really their character. And he has 13 core values. None of them have to do with sport, believe it or not. Like even focus, I thought, oh, well, that's on the field. No, that's in the classroom. So he always preached, character first, then academics, then soccer. And one of the things that I thought was so unique is these 13 core values, peers rate each other 3 times a year, the players. And really what you're looking to instill is this idea of that it matters. That's the biggest award. So you find ways to reinforce this. And I think it all starts with the top, like whether you're in an organization or whether you're a coach of a team, in this case, an athletic team. I think you need a leader or coach that's walking the talk. People become very cynical if they aren't. And in fact, that's, again, going back to that survey, 25% of people say that they're uncivil because their leader is. And so if you think about, like, if this is important, if you're going to have values on this, trying to ensure that the leader is willing to do this. And I think a big part of that then becomes like the next step is like this Anson Dorrance, who's won 22 national championships and kind of built the U.S. women's national team culture. He says he can't coach people unless they trust him. And so that idea of, connecting with people and building trust up front before you can lead them to your model or coach them, I think is really important. And so much of that comes down to the respect piece of it, which you've emphasized in different models of yours.
I'm wondering now, would the last 5 years have catapulted us forward into this world of online, virtual, asynchronous interaction? And now a lot of people, that is their professional world, is that they work virtually, they work from home. Christine, if you can talk about what are the biggest risks that can threaten civility and also the opportunities when you're talking about that specific population and how they navigate their professional world.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging. I mean, friends of mine have research that show that you don't tend to feel a sense of belonging if you are working virtually. And this was, again, pre-pandemic data. But I think the other piece of it that becomes more challenging is that oftentimes you are relying on, let's say, email or even Zoom. But the nonverbals and the tone have so much to do with our perceptions of respect. And so tone is really tricky because even if we have the best intentions, we can't accurately judge our tone unless we're listening to a recording, but probably better yet, it's got to be someone helping break that down. And so I think that the nonverbals and the tone, as much as like the physical distance, just make it more challenging as far as potential misunderstandings and a lack of feeling connected to someone. So it really requires more work on the part of the individuals that are working in a hybrid situation. And ideally, the leaders can do some things to try to create more connection and community. But even with virtual teams, like one of the best pieces of advice that they suggest based on research is bring the team together in person initially. And so you give each other an idea of each other. There's tends to be, I think you said it earlier, but you're assuming positive intent. You give people the benefit of the doubt more often that way, so that there's lots of potential wins. But when possible, especially at the beginning, the research has shown that that's really invaluable if you can create personal touch points.
So are you team hybrid versus only in person or only virtual?
Yeah, that's a tough question. No, personally, I'm team hybrid because I think it's a reality of the world. And so if I had to choose, I would choose that. And part of that is just selfishly, like knowing how I work. And so I try to put myself in other shoes. And for so many reasons, I think that there's a reality to, like, especially if you're doing thought work or, you're trying to research or write on your own. I find it easier, if I'm doing some of that from a home type environment, or I get to choose when to create that. So I'm very empathetic to people, and that's despite family or personal situations that might require, whether you're raising kids or whether you're caregiving or, however you might need to. I just think that there's a lot involved with commuting nowadays that's quite stressful and quite time. And if you think about energy, which I know you guys study and all of that, then, it's something to consider. But you don't want to miss out completely on any personal touch points. I don't think it's healthy for the individual. I don't necessarily think it's healthy for the team or organization. So finding that right mix is going to be, I think, key and can be quite challenging.
Yeah. I think there is, I know that there is a lot of research that has been recently been published about some of the work Adam Grant and other colleagues, and we've done some work within healthcare looking about what are these best environments, and hybrid remains the most beneficial and chosen aspect, even for people they prefer in person, or when you offer them hybrid, they go by default with hybrid, because it does give the best of both worlds in many ways. And as you said, there are challenges now with commute, and we have asked people to shift towards a virtual life, and then all of a sudden we're asking them to come back to workplace and change their whole world all over again. That is stressful and that is challenging. And yes, it there is an aspect that the workplace also have to survive and thrive, but it's a tough spot.
It is. I think it gets back to that. You want people to thrive in their personal life or outside of the confines of the physical workplace. Like, there are real benefits to that. I mean, it really ties to your model on, I think it's meds and things like that. But I think that that's easier if you have control, some control over, timing and things like that. Like, and so that's something to consider. But I'm not surprised, and really trust your and Adam Grant's research. He's fantastic and has done so much great work as far as spreading some of this and ways that people are able to thrive much more in the workplace.
Yeah. And speaking of actionable change, what do you think are 2 to 3 small but mighty acts someone at any level, if they're not a formal authority, to build a more civil, inclusive, supportive community at work, do you think?
Small actions matter a lot. So I hope that's encouraging and makes people feel like they can really make a difference. One small example of how this works is the 10-5 way, which was started at Ochsner Healthcare in Louisiana. And the idea was, if you're within 10 feet, you make eye contact and smile. If you're within 5 feet of a colleague, you say hello. And what they found is civility spread, patient satisfaction scores rose, as did patient referrals. And I think it really gets at this idea of how this ripples. There's some other research based on companion love that was the late Sigal Bersad and Mandy O'Neill from Wharton. And what they studied was in units, and this was a long-term healthcare facility, studied this over about 18 months. What they found is in units where that was a sense of what they termed companion love. And these could be very small acts of, asking how someone was doing, small acts of kindness, gestures. What they found is people that had that, they tended to perform much better. They were much more satisfied, all of that. But the more interesting research was on patients, and they tended to have, better moods, believe it or not, better health outcomes and things of that nature. And then the patients' families were far more satisfied with the facility, tended to recommend it more, and so forth. So I love that body of work because, and they took it and generalized it because they got questions on this, like, would that happen in finance or real estate or what have you? And so they I think, ran the study in at least 6 different organizations and industries. And what they found was, again, very similar effects around such positive outcomes and how it spread to various populations. And so I think it really puts in a nutshell how our small actions, however trivial they may seem, people feel them. People are desperate now, particularly given the lack of community and also given the mental health statistics where we're at an all-time low. The idea of these small moments really can lift people, making them feel valued, appreciated, and heard. And to your point earlier, just witnessing this too gives me my colleagues are decent human beings. I want to, show up for them and actually care for them and things like that. So it really tends to spread in quite meaningful ways that might not be obvious, but I think are really powerful and hopefully empower us to just make a difference in as many small ways as we can throughout our day.
I'm remembering a conversation where I believe it was talking about Disney and Disney model and why it is the happiest place on earth, whether we agree with it or not. But it is that approach to smile and smile to everyone and invite everyone, just even with your eyes if you don't want to say anything. But that creates that positive effect and sense of joy.
Yeah, I love that example too. I was recently on a panel with 9 orthopedics that were running clinics and things like that. And one of them just shared that he got this advice a long time ago, that if he just, smiled and said hello to people and asked them how they were, or just the smile and hello at the beginning with staff members, it totally transformed the day and how the clinic went and so forth. And it was a really powerful example of how you can make this shift in an incredibly challenging environment. Because, of course, what the issue is that healthcare is so challenging these days. And even if you could control your own teams and organization, people are facing it from patients, other caregivers, and so forth, in such challenging ways that you really want to set your teams up for success by getting them off to a good start. And, throughout the day, when you do have these touch points, making the most of them. And so I just thought it was a wonderful example of how you can shift things and see the ripple effects in the office and even then the effects on patients, because your staff is interacting with them differently. They have more patience and, they're setting the tone in powerful ways.
The power of small acts. And also, especially for patients, they have enough already that they're dealing with. And that is the least that we can do, and especially in healthcare. But that applies to every workplace and every profession. My father always says, smiling is free.
I love that.
And what is it? He says, smiling is free. And but it really is that the anger or frowning. I'm sorry. Yes, smiling is free and frowning is costly. So, and I like that. So I've always thought about it. But
you should have that on signs.
I should.
Well, and Moain, that reminds me, I think Zig Ziglar once said, if they didn't give you a smile, give them one of your own. So
I love, that's a great one.
I love that too. Yeah.
That's a great one. So as we are kind of concluding this just deeply humanistic and powerful conversation, I really appreciate you. We started with the origin story of how you encountered this life-transforming experience for you, an event that impacted your father, and how you started on this journey and track in your work and research. So from the origins to where Christine is today now, what do you feel has changed from where you started to where you are today about the work that you're doing?
Well, for starters, I started with the dark side, I felt like, and I was involved with the positive organizational scholarship community at University of Michigan. And I always was self-conscious because I was the one person that, was claiming to be so positive and yet would started with such the negative side of things. So they were a wonderful group. And I wanted to be patient and kind of, like so many other things, we pay attention more to the negative. And so I felt like my first job was to try to move to like mitigate rudeness or incivility. And then I shifted to why does civility pay? Because I felt like even the MBAs I taught were a little skeptical and we had data saying that people actually, like 40% of people were afraid that if they were civil at work, they would be taken advantage of. And so I wanted to show how respect and civility pays. And then this sense of thriving has always been at the core for me, both as a person and a former athlete. Like, I think that was my main goal, not just to survive, although there were parts of my life where that was maybe really what I was doing, but how do I get to thriving? And so it shifted to thriving and, as you know, community. And now with colleagues, I'm studying like, how do you help people grow? And, this happened to be athletic teams. And so we were looking at what are the differences between that, but really it ties to culture, that you can have competition, for example, and community. And that's a great place. How do you get there? Oftentimes it's to focus on character. And so as people pointed out, maybe that circles back to the civility stuff and at least in the respect context. But I think, generally, if I put it under the how do you help people thrive, that's a really big part of it. And, whether it's at work, but we see the same kind of outcomes and the same kind of effects outside of the workplace. So I think it's more general than even at work. But certainly given my and others' workplace experiences and how much time we pour into it, getting that right can be really helpful to people's quality of life and their sense of thriving.
Appreciate you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Now, so Christine, we have these sort of fast and fun, what we call the rapid fire round. These are quick questions. Just we'll start off with the first one. Is there a shorter, mighty ritual that you use to reset between meetings?
Probably walking or movement for sure. I love to move. So
yeah, I love that walking. I think Steve Jobs used to get some great ideas. Just go for a walk. Get some. Second one is there like one micro behavior that instantly raises civility in the room or on camera?
Listening, paying attention, I think is vastly underestimated. Thank yous is another one that people don't get enough appreciation, recognition. So those are two big ones.
Excellent. Number 3, a phrase you would use to disarm tension or in a tough moment.
My go-to phrase is, who do you want to be? So that might be one. I don't know how people would respond to that. I'd probably have to know them maybe to use that. But I love that question. It's been so helpful in my own life. And I think it's one that ties into many of these themes that we've been discussing.
That is fantastic. Number 4, if you weren't doing this amazing work, what alternative career path might you have followed?
Something around sports, probably coaching or sports commentary. For me, I just love being around that kind of athletic activities.
Love that. And last one, a book or practice or place that reliably restores your energy.
A place, did you say?
It could be a book, practice, or place that restores energy.
For me, nature. So I said walking, but I really meant walking outside if possible and the sunshine. So for me, whether it's in particular the water, it's very calming, but I love the mountains as well. And so just being near nature, for me, you can literally see my stress go down. Like my aura ring, I show up very different.
That's amazing.
Christine, thank you so much for your time and talent and treasures that you have shared with us. We truly appreciate your work, your conversations, your insights, the work that you're doing about civility. respect, belonging, community are deeply relevant, especially these days. I think they are so timely, and it truly inspires conversations about what make a culture feel concrete, and also doable, that you translate the words and the research into action. So we appreciate you being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's so important, and I love the way that you're framing things. I didn't talk about it enough, but I think that taking care of yourself is so important to how you mentioned, like taking care of oneself, the community of oneself, tying to how you interact with another person, much less an organization. And so I love that thread, and I think it's really important work that you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate you. For our audience, we invite you to read the work of Dr. Christine Porath. If you would like to dig deeper, visit her website, christineporath.com. I can't recommend this book enough. It is just a thoughtful, wonderful, and inspiring work that translates into action. So we thank you all. Until next time, inward with courage and outward with compassion.
Thank you for joining the Well-Being Manifesto Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment or review. To learn more about this discussion, visit thewellbeingmanifesto.com. And remember, inward with courage, outward with compassion.